to this week's Cruise Chat. I'm Kathleen Penner, owner of Plenty of Sunshine Travel, and today I'm joined by Karl, and Karl is from Silversea, and today we're going to be going over some of their exciting itineraries. I've met with Karl before, and if you'd like to look back at the past episodes, it is episode 16 and 28, but do come back to this one because we've got some exciting stuff to talk about. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. Thanks for having me again, and it's always a pleasure. Very often when we talk about expedition cruising, we talk about the big three, the three that sell the most, the three that people, when they first dip their toes, if you will, into expedition cruising, these are the destinations that get talked about the most. The Galapagos, for fairly obvious reasons, it's relatively close when you think about it. Most people have some fairly easy ways to get to Miami. And then from Miami, it's a 3.5-hour flight to Quito and then out to the Galapagos. So it's very, very exotic, but it's relatively close and not too much time change. The other two destinations that we talk a lot about with expedition are Antarctica and the Arctic. And you and I have discussed those before on those previous episodes, as you've mentioned. Right. But today I thought we would talk about some of the other destinations, because while we're not in Antarctica and the Arctic, the ships are moving around all over the world, and pretty much anywhere water touches land, we're doing something interesting with our little expedition ships. So when we launched the 22-23 expedition season, there are 121 different departures. Now, a good chunk of that, to be fair, is made up of Galapagos because we operate every week, Saturday to Saturday. Sometimes the ones over the holidays tend to be a bit longer because we don't want people flying on Christmas or New Year's. But still, 121 departures, or let's say a good 70 or 80 outside of the Galapagos. And it covers areas all over the world to the most far-flung places, but also relatively close to home. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit as well, because right now, at the end of April 2021, what we're finding is that people are starting to think about getting back out there again. And they're after a year or 13, 14 months of this, people are starting to see a glimmer of hope and a light at the end of the tunnel. So what we're noticing is that when they are talking about traveling again, and specifically cruising, they're definitely looking at smaller ships. And that's what we have with Expedition. Our largest ship in terms of guest capacity is 274. They're looking at remote destinations, which is what Expedition is all about. And they're looking for that because these remote destinations were virtually untouched, or in some cases completely untouched by the COVID-19 virus. And the other thing that's shifting with mentality is people are looking at these epic trips. And I know some people use the term bucket list, but sometimes it gets overused. But anyway, they're looking at an epic trip that may have been on their radar, but in a couple of years from now, down the road, whatever, that has now made its way to the top of the list, or the first in line, because what we're recognizing is, if there's anything that the last 14 months have taught us, it's that this microscopic virus can throw everybody's plans out the window for much longer than we thought. So when we're able to do this again safely and effectively, you know what? I think I will go and do that trip to the Galapagos that I've always been planning, because God forbid this should happen again and another few years go by and I'm that much older and what have you. So that's what we're noticing right now with expedition travel. And I wanted to talk today about some of the different regions that you and I haven't talked about before. So the Indian Ocean, South America, we'll skip the polar regions today, the Kimberley coast, and then a little bit of Northern Europe as well. We do this, I mentioned the 3 small ships. There are actually 4. There's one that's very specific to the Galapagos. She won't sail anywhere other than the Galapagos. And again, we can cover that, or we have covered that in a previous episode. The Silver Explorer at 144 guests, the Silver Cloud at 240 guests when she's in the polar regions, 254 guests when she's not in the polar regions, and the Silver Wind at 274 guests. So when I said small ships, I meant small ships, not only in terms of their guest capacity, but in terms of their physical size. And that's what allows them to get into all of these little out-of-the-way places. In 2019, we visited over 900 different ports of call, Silversea, and on the expedition side, 570 of those. So again, it's the small ship with their shallow draft that allows us to get into these places. And from a guest capacity perspective, you're looking at ships out there these days that are, upwards of 5,000 and pushing 6,000 guests in the Caribbean and the Med. 274 seems tiny by comparison. It's 5% of what some of these large ones are. So this is definitely what people are looking to. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that are looking for something that's very, very far flung and really off the beaten path, we're doing a series of voyages through Africa and the Indian Ocean. So from Cape Town up to Zanzibar, the first part of this in South Africa, then Mozambique, then we're going over to Madagascar, and then ultimately ending in Zanzibar. So very much about wildlife. When we're in South Africa, most of the excursions are to game reserves and on jeeps looking for wildlife. But even when we're cruising around, a fair bit of snorkeling on this voyage and getting to some of these remote spots and little islands along the way, and certainly in Madagascar looking for the lemurs. So again, this is not mainstream cruising. This is really getting off the beaten path. And there isn't a lot of infrastructure in these places, in many of these places, not the kind of infrastructure that most North American travelers would want. So it's really handy to come back to a ship, to your floating hotel, to come back to the comfort and the food and what have you of the ship. Go out by day, get some dirt under your fingernails, boots on the ground, experience what there is to experience, and then come back to the comfort of the ship. So moving on from Zanzibar, then out across the Seychelles, ultimately ending in Mahe. Mm-hmm. And this is very much for snorkelers, very much for exploration, again, of tiny little villages and remote beaches out in the middle of nowhere, looking for wildlife. In Aldabra, for example, the giant tortoises in Aldabra, there are more on that little island, giant tortoises, than there are throughout all of the Galapagos. Wow. Different species, yeah. Similar animal, but there are more of them in that one little island. So again, these are destinations that are incredibly difficult to get to on your own, if not impossible. And so you want that infrastructure. And we travel with the infrastructure. So the Zodiacs, the kayaks, the snorkeling gear, because when we get somewhere like here, there are no roads. So there are no buses and jeeps to take us around. We use the Zodiacs like jeeps. We use the kayaks to maneuver around, and we use the snorkeling gear to get in there and really explore underwater. So we're pretty self-sustained. Then onward from there, we will deadhead from Mahe to Colombo. But then the next voyage is Colombo down to Singapore. Again, some really remote spots. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to make a change in Myanmar, obviously, given what's going on in Myanmar right now. I know that the operations team are looking into what we will do in order to modify that itinerary and make sure that we steer clear of that. Of course, if things get better in the next year or so, then we should be fine. But I know that they're already looking into it. And again, I think the best thing that can be said about this is just how remote it is. On this voyage, we get to Komodo as well, so to see the Komodo dragon. And we're parts of Malaysia where we're getting into orangutan sanctuaries as well. So we have a partnership with an orangutan sanctuary when we get to that part of Malaysia and go ashore and see that. So cultures, wildlife, just incredible vistas and landscapes. Sorry, Komodo. I mentioned Komodo earlier. I was a little premature. It's here from Singapore to Darwin, where we're going through some of Indonesia and then touching on the northwest coast of Australia, ultimately ending in Darwin. It's in here that we will go to Komodo. There we go. The Komodo dragon. Very, very remote, pristine beaches. And using the Zodiacs as jeeps, if you will, as this mode of transportation to go and explore and look for wildlife and look for these incredible natural phenomena and that sort of thing. And always small groups, all of that being done with the Silver Explorer. So 144 guests maximum. So moving on to South America, I'm really excited about this one, the Amazon, because I was a Rotary exchange student in Brazil for a year from mid-83 to 84. And I am going to be expedition team on this voyage. So we're traveling from Fortaleza all the way down the Amazon to Manaus, all the way back out, and then up the northeast coast of South America through the Guyanas, and then ultimately ending in Barbados. So this is very much an in-depth exploration of the Amazon, again, using the zodiacs to get where the ship can't go to look for wildlife, look for these natural phenomena, visit with the local indigenous groups, learn about life there, taste different things, see different things. This is close to Manaus. This is it's called O Encontro Da Zagos, the meeting of the waters. And it's where the two rivers, the dark one is the Solimões coming out of like Venezuela. It's darker and warmer. And the silty one, or the brown coffee colored one, is coming out of the Peruvian Andes or coming out of the Andes, and it's got more silt, it's faster moving, it's colder, and the pH is different than the other one. And for all of those reasons, they don't mix for about 12 kilometers. Oh. And then they finally start to blend together. You drive across them with an outboard and it churns up, and then it separates like oil and water. It's absolutely phenomenal. So that's one of the phenomena that we will see along the way, as well as Vitória Regia, the giant lily pads, about 3 feet wide. So really looking forward to that one. On the other side of South America, then, Chilean Fjords voyages. We always offer these on our way down to or back from Antarctica. And a lot of people will focus on Antarctica, but this part of Chile is absolutely phenomenal because you're getting in and amongst these little islands here. You're getting into the Chilean fjords, little villages and fishing communities along the way. Again, spots that are really, really difficult to get to on your own, if not impossible. And through our local contacts, getting in and meeting the locals, learning about life and the lifestyle there, and always, always, always tasting the food. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things.
Yes.
Lots of glaciers along this coast as well as we get into the Chilean fjords. Moving all the way over across the Atlantic to the Azores. This is very interesting because we're taking off from Lisbon and ending in Dakar. And this collection of islands, the Azores, Madeira, and all the way down just off the coast of Africa, this whole collection of islands is known as Macaronesia, like a macaroon, Macaronesia. And volcanic in nature, most of these. So we go and visit some of the calderas, and we partake in something that's part of the culture, certainly in the Azores, where they'll cook in the ground in a thermal steam vent because of all the geological activity there. Brilliant for whale watching. The Azores has really come up in the last 5 years as promoting themselves as a adventure tourism or adventure travel destination, and fantastic when we're going to be there at the exact right time of year for whale watching. So there's a lot of that going on as well, tasting the wines, tasting the local cheeses. So again, just kind of getting back to a much more simple lifestyle in a part of the world that still celebrates that part of their culture and little villages along the way.
I'd have a hard time coming home without a whole bucket full of recipes and all kinds of things so I can recreate it all. I love food. Yeah.
There's something really interesting that Silversea is doing on the classic side, because the latest ship, which was just launched, and we hope to start sailing in Greece in July, we've got on board that ship something called SALT, or a concept called SALT, Sea and Land Taste. So there will be a salt bar, there will be a salt lab and a salt kitchen, because one of the questions we always get asked is, hey, we're sailing around India, why aren't we eating Indian food? Mm-hmm. Or we're sailing around Indonesia, why aren't we eating Indonesian food? Or off the coast of Chile, why aren't we trying Chilean food? Mm-hmm. The whole concept, the SALT concept, is to do that, is to introduce local ingredients on a day-by-day basis as we're sailing by a region, incorporate those into the drinks in SALT bar, incorporate those into the menu in the SALT kitchen and in the SALT lab, to go with the chef, go ashore, go into the markets, buy the ingredients, taste them, smell them, touch them, come back to the ship and watch a demonstration of how to work with that stuff, how to work with those ingredients and incorporate them into your own cooking and take the recipes away, as you said. So salt is
wow,
yeah, it's a really cool
right
concept. And once we get it tweaked, and because we haven't been able to see it in action yet, but once we get that dialed in and tweaked on that ship, then we're going to introduce it to more of the fleet, certainly across the classic fleet. So those voyages in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, through Asia, we'll see more and more of that. So also off the coast of South America, or going, I think we're moving from east to west across the Pacific here. So leaving Chile, just outside of Santiago, Valparaiso. I've got these in reverse order. Sorry, the voyage is from west to east, but the series of voyages I have are from east to west. So in this case, from French Polynesia, from Tahiti, Papeete, out to Valparaiso, with a stop at Easter Island, of course, to see the moai, the giant heads out at Easter Island, always looking out to sea. So there's some speculation that they were meant to scare off possible invaders. There's much speculation as to what the moai mean and why they were there. And of course, always meeting with the local folks. From Cairns to Lautoka, so to Fiji, close to Nandi. This one taking in a fair bit of Papua New Guinea. And again, always getting off the ship, going and meeting the locals, being part of some of the local festivities and the performances that they'll put on for us. And we're the only ones there. This series of voyages as well, done with the Silver Explorer. So 144 guests. You don't feel like you're invading a place when there are just 144 of us. And some might be off kayaking and some may stay on the ship. And so it's rarely the full complement of 144. From Lautoka to Papeete, so from Fiji to Tahiti, visiting all kinds of little islands along the way. Plenty of snorkeling, plenty of exploration, just getting out and hiking along the trails and getting to the tops of these extinct volcanoes and taking lots and lots of photographs as well. Alaska and the Russian Far East. So this is a part of the world, of course, Alaska, a number of people are familiar with, but we use Alaska as a jumping off point. So we'll start in Nome and use that as a launch pad to get over to the Russian Far East, because there are some small airstrips that you could get into here in a place called Providenia, and I'm blanking on the name of the other, Anadyr is another one, but it would typically mean going all the way around over the Atlantic, around Europe, and then covering all of all of Russia to get to this part of Russia. Instead, what we're doing is we're going to start in Nome, sail across the Bering, go and visit Chukotka, this area of Russia, and then come down, pick up the Aleutian Islands. For birders, this is absolutely paradise because there are some endemics on some of these islands, the only place in the world that you would see some of these species. Visiting with some of the tribes or the nomadic groups in that part of Russia, nomadic reindeer herders, for example, and seeing plenty of wildlife along the way. Beautiful. So really, really spectacular part of the world. And it ends in Vancouver, so nice and close to home for us, for Canadians. Australia, these are voyages that touch on the Kimberley coast. Excuse me, this area of Australia up in the northwest. What we were finding from a lot of our North American-based guests was that's a long way to go for 10 days. And I'd love to see more of that coast. What have you got? So we've expanded these, and we've got two of them, one from Darwin down to Fremantle and another one from Fremantle back up to Darwin, back-to-back 17 days. So with a focus on this area of Australia, the northwest coast, the Kimberley coast, but exploring the coast all the way down. Whales, lots of large pelagics, marine life, great for snorkeling. Excuse me, when you get into the Kimberleys, it's like exploring the Grand Canyon. If the Grand Canyon were flooded and you had a zodiac to zoom around in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The Bungo Bungo ranges, so lots of interesting geological formations along the way. This is an incredible spot called Montgomery Reef, where at low tide, or as the tide goes out, these artificial waterfalls and little rivers are created. This is seawater. This is the ocean. And this is in the middle of a reef as the tide goes down, because the reef around it is so high that trapped water starts to rush out into these, for lack of a better word, waterfalls. They're not, they don't fall a lot. So the vertical drop isn't significant, but the rush of water is, and it creates this big channel as well. So we go and explore in here when the tide is right. This is what I meant about sort of a flooded Grand Canyon idea, using the Zodiacs to go and explore and get into little spots, and then trails, and hike along the trails and meet our Aboriginal partners at the end of the trail, who will then describe the rock art to us and talk to us about lifestyle, their lifestyle. Helicopters to get around to some of the even more remote places, so they're waiting for us on the beach. And all of this again with the Silver Explorer at 144 guests. So a little closer to home, the Eastern Caribbean. The Amazon one that I mentioned before, where she ends in Bridgetown, this one will pick up and sail through some of the lesser known islands, smaller islands of the Caribbean, and then ultimately all the way to Fort Lauderdale. So again, a little bit closer to home for those that are not ready to venture too far afield yet. And this is fun because you're seeing the Caribbean without the big cruise ships, because the ports here are not big enough to support the cruise ships. And we can get in there because the ships are quite small. And then we've got the Zodiacs to get everyone ashore very, very quickly. So we can still, even where we can't come alongside, where there isn't a jetty or a pier that's big enough or deep enough to take even our small ships, we would anchor just offshore and then use the Zodiacs to get in and go and explore these small towns. And again, the food in the Caribbean, oh my God. On the other side then, Central America, so starting in Punta Arenas, Costa Rica, making our way down the coast, visiting Panama, the Darien jungle, all the way down the coast of Colombia, and ultimately ending in Guayaquil, Ecuador. Again, a little bit closer to home for those that are not ready yet to cross the Pacific or cross the Atlantic, a little bit closer, but still very exotic and very, very interesting, and meeting the Embera people, for example, in Central America. If you really don't want to go too far, there are a couple more here to talk about. So from Vancouver to San Diego. And this is just using a small ship. So rather than cruising the west coast of the US and a little bit of Canada with a great big ship with thousands and thousands of guests, this is a small ship with 274 guests, getting into little ports along the way, using the Zodiacs where we can along this coast, because the itinerary is left vague on purpose. We, depending on what we see, if we see a great number of seals or California sea lions or orcas playing somewhere, we'll get in the Zodiacs and go and observe them for a while. So a lot to see along that coast, and it's absolutely beautiful. And of course, phenomenal wine tasting. Yes. Once we get a little closer to Napa and Sonoma.
I love that you don't stop at the traditional big cruise ship stops. You get to actually see the culture. It hasn't been all touristy. It's actual culture. And I love that. It's great.
Yeah, that's where the small ship really, really comes into play. So this is a little bit different now. Now we're on the on the East Coast. Again, I think in a post-COVID world or a less COVID world, there are going to be some people who just aren't ready to go too far away yet. So starting in Fort Lauderdale and ending in Halifax, again, for Canadians, nice to end in our home country. So that'll make it a little bit nicer. So, none of these are small ports that you've never heard of. We've heard of Charleston and Baltimore and New York, of course, transiting the Cape Cod Canal, things like that. Newport, Rhode Island, Portland, all places that we've heard of. But again, we try to do it in a very, very different way, using the small ships to get in and get closer, and then use the Zodiacs to go and explore even more. Small groups, this is the wind as well. So again, 274 guests. So you're not disembarking with 3,000 or 5,000 other people. You're disembarking with 270 other people. So it's a very, very different experience. Even going into New York, I had lunch on board one of our ships in the port of New York, and you're right there in Manhattan. And it's pretty phenomenal because the perspective of sitting on an outer deck on one of our ships and seeing the Manhattan skyline in front of you from the water level or a couple decks up is pretty special.
Mm-hmm. And it would be so much faster to disembark with only 174 guests as opposed to 5,000. So that's fabulous too.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's a great story, and I wasn't there, but it really highlighted for the guests that were sailing with Silversea. We were in a port somewhere, and just as the day trips were coming back, and there was another ship on the other side of the pier that was one of those couple of thousands versus one of our ships that had about 300. And just as they were coming off, or we got the radio message that the buses were coming, it started to rain. So the hotel team, the food and beverage team, the butlers, the room attendants, they went and grabbed all of the umbrellas off of the ship. And they walked the pier and they walked to where the buses show up because it wasn't forecast for rain. And as our guests came off the bus, everyone was handed an umbrella. And they weren't doing that for the 2,000 people that were coming back on the other ship because the logistics of it are just too challenging. So
that's wonderful.
It really makes a difference. Yeah. So I hope that goes a little way towards explaining some of the parts of the world that we can visit on Silversea Expedition. And, as always, if you're interested in more, reach out to Kathleen, who in turn can reach out to me. We can do one of these sessions privately and really go into detail about any one of these destinations.
Absolutely. Yes, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for putting that together. That's fabulous. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a great week. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this week's Cruise Chat with Karl. It was fabulous to see some of those amazing itineraries, and I love how they go to places that isn't the normal touristy areas, and yet you're able to dig right in deep to the culture, to taste the foods, to see the sights, and just to get in on beautiful small towns. Next week, I'm going to be meeting with Jen from Avalon Waterways, and we're going to be going over some of their river cruise itineraries, so make sure you tune in next week. The best way to see all of the content that I put out, and it comes out every Thursday around 11 a.m., is to subscribe to our channel. So make sure that you hit subscribe and hit that notification bar, and you'll find out as soon as I get a new video up. Also, if you'd like to get in on the conversation, join us on our Facebook page. It's Plenty of Sunshine Travel on Facebook. So head on over there. I also post on Instagram frequently as well. If you're listening to this on the Cruising the Waves podcast, thank you so much. And if you prefer to see some of the pictures, tune into our YouTube channel, which is Plenty of Sunshine Travel on YouTube. Also, the other way, if you would prefer to listen to this on the go, tune into our podcast and you can just stream it right from there on your favorite channel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see everybody next week. Goodbye.